everyone. We're here for the Common Core in Action panel. I like to think of this as like the meat of what we're doing today. I have 4 great educators on the panel, and we're gonna get to the heart of what Common Core looks like in schools. So I know a lot of you have done some reporting on this, and I'm hoping you get some more story ideas. And yeah, so I'll just introduce who I have here. We have Kristy Straley is a 4th grade teacher at Puesta del Sol Elementary in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she's previously worked as a reading interventionist, and you're on your district's Common Core transition team. And so that means you're helping with implementation of the standards. You've taught for 16 years, and you're a national board certified teacher. Merlinda Maldonado is a 6th grade math teacher at the Hill Campus of Arts and Sciences in Denver Public Schools. She's worked on curriculum design for a district as a teacher leader. Mark Sass is a social studies teacher at Legacy High School in Thornton, Colorado. He's currently working a hybrid role. In addition to teaching classes, he's helping his district implement standards-based grading. Mark's a National Teacher Fellow for the Hope Street Group and an Aspen Institute Teacher Leader Fellow. And we have Luann Tallman. She's the principal at Iowa Elementary School in Aurora, Colorado. And she's been an educator for 30 years and taught in Nebraska, DC, Colorado, and Germany. So we're gonna dig right in here. So if you don't mind, I kind of want to just go down and give us like a very brief summary. Tell us just a little bit about your district, where you teach, if you know some of the demographics, and where you guys are with Common Core implementation. So you want to start, Kristy?
Sure. I teach in Rancho Public Schools, which is a suburb just outside of Albuquerque Public Schools, so it's a smaller school district. But my school is fairly large. We have 800 and something students. It's a Title I school. There's high mobility at my school. And we are for 4th grade, in the 2nd year of implementation of Common Core. We rolled it out for 3rd grade a year prior to 4th and 5th. So 4th and 5th is in their 2nd year of implementation. So that's where we are with the Common Core.
Great. Merlinda?
I'm Merlinda Maldonado, and I teach at Hill Campus for Denver Public Schools. My school and all of DPS is really diverse. We are a very large middle school. We have about 800 and something students as well. We're in our, I guess, 3rd to 4th year of implementing the Common Core, so DPS has been very proactive, knowing that this is like coming down and training teachers, preparing teachers, but really like this year has just been really implementing it across all grade levels. And right now we're in the process, well, I guess not really in the process, but we've been, over the summer, the teachers got together and they were supplementing some materials to make sure that kids are ready for Common Core, and just materials that, like, for example, I teach 6th grade, and the current curriculum that we're using doesn't have anything on expressions and equations, so we have to fill some of those gaps. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Mark?
Good afternoon. I teach in a school district, Adams 12, which is about 40,000 students. It's a suburban school district just north of Denver. We have about 40% free and reduced, fairly diverse school district. We are, when Colorado adopted the Colorado Academic Standards in 2010, we slowly began to implement those. Those standards are based on the Common Core standards. We're not calling them the Common Core standards because it's all about what you call it. So we've been implementing those over the years. We are probably within our 3rd full year of implementing, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more later on about what implementation means and how that plays out. But we're in the process of continuing to write curriculum. We start next week. Thank goodness this weather wasn't next week, because we start testing next week with Park. And we have 3 weeks of testing broken out over 2 days. And so we're curious to see how that's all going to roll out and how that's going to work as well.
I'm Luann Tallman. I work at Iowa Elementary, which is in Aurora, Colorado, one of the large urban districts in our area. We've been working on this probably about 3 years. So the district has done some pacing and planning guide alignments for us, and then we have tackled kind of the standards as a school. So we've done some work on writing was on math, that was our first alignment project. We were working with the alignment of our standards with math and our resources, learning targets, success criteria. And then we have tackled writing right now, and that's what we're presently doing right now.
Great. Luann, I'm going to ask you to start with this, and then I'm going to let you guys jump in. But from an administrative perspective, how are things going? How are teachers doing with the standard? Did you have problems with buy-in, or have people kind of come to just accept that's what's going on in schools and they're okay with it?
Yeah, I think what we have to always remember as educators is what we control and what we don't control. We don't control what the standards were that were delivered to our doorstep. We don't control the testing that is coming down. We all pray for no snow next week because it could throw us completely off. You're right. I hadn't thought about that word yet.
Sorry, keep you up tonight.
I have lots of stuff. So I think teachers are glad about the work that needs to be done. And I think what they see in the standards is there's some really good work that the kids can do and they can do. So I think when we look at the standards, we have looked at what opportunities do we have to extend things, because mostly we were all educated under a standard or a skills and knowledge base. And that's how we were all. So we learned skills, we had knowledge. Now we're required to do skills, of course, knowledge, application, and synthesis. Now that's the new part that the standards in the park is testing, is that second section where none of us have really ever gone before. So I think what's new for us is that we really have to do the work around making that application and that synthesis of these standards, because that's what the core is asking us, is how to synthesize the information the kids will have and how to put that into work.
So tell us a little bit about how, and maybe Mark, you want to jump in here. How does application and synthesis differ? Like, what exactly do you mean by that? Are you talking about the performance tasks that kids are going to have to do on the
Right.
testing? We learned a little bit about that earlier. Are you talking about just the problems are harder that they're working on? The writing is harder. It's more in depth, or
Well,
what do you
I
mean?
think it's much more in depth. So I think they're asked to do multiple steps problems. They're asked to do take many different, maybe 2 or 3 different resources. It might be a graph and a table and a reading, and now you have to tell us what the pioneers now took to Leadville so that they were able to survive up there. So it's the thought process beyond just knowing how to do the addition, do the subtraction, know how to add, or write a paragraph about what you know about history. It's taking all that information now and going to a level of really having to think through everything and how everything relates, the patterns they see, the relationships they see. And that's just a whole nother thought process around the thinking skills that have to happen.
And the way I like to explain it to parents sometimes is, if you remember when you were in school, and all of us have been, when you had the textbook and you had to answer questions to a chapter, and then you had that critical thinking question. It was like, don't bother with that, do the other ones. Well, this is what we're asking you to do now. It's that critical thinking. And that's an expectation for all students to be able to do that. And I think math is the easiest way for me to explain it when I talk to parents about, I don't want you to walk out of here knowing what the formulas are. I want you to be able to be confronted with a new situation in which you have to decide which of those formulas is going to work and then solve the problem. That's that next step up that we're asking students to do. And that has been a challenge for parents to understand that's something that all students are being expected to achieve, and not just the gifted students. That's what we expect all students to be able to achieve at this point. So it is that idea of being confronted with something new and unique, and how do you respond to that? What do you decide to do? And that's that application and synthesis piece.
Kristy and Merlinda, tell us a little bit about what is challenging here. What's the most challenging thing about implementing these new standards? You want to start, Kristy?
Sure. We refer to it in my classroom and when I'm communicating with parents as the productive struggle. Allowing your child to have a little bit of productive struggle when they come home and they're working on their homework. We've been so quick in the past to just have the kids arrive at the correct answer. And so it just speaks to what you two were saying as well. It's just allowing the kids to productively work through a problem and be able to use that in real life situations. And so I think that shift has been huge, and just needing the time to see this play out in the classroom and the time to communicate to parents effectively what where we're headed with this. I think those are two of the most important things.
Yeah, we'll come back to this parent issue. It's come up a few times here, but Merlinda, tell us a little bit about what's challenging about implementing these standards.
I think kind of what everybody is saying on the panel. I have worked with the Common Core specifically with math because that's what I teach. But it's just building that conceptual understanding of concepts before building the procedural fluency is really, really important because kids want to know procedures because that's how their parents learned and that's how parents are trying to help them at home. So when kids have to do that critical thinking piece, that is sometimes challenging to communicate to parents the importance of that because the whole point of Common Core is to get our kids ready for college and career, and it's just super important that they're not just memorizing a bunch of facts, but they understand how those facts play out in real life.
I want to just say too,
Yeah.
an important part of what I think has to happen is that time, and we were kind of listening to you all, the resource, we never have enough money, we'll never have this, and it's really a time essence. It's how much time goes into unpacking the standards, looking at the right resources, finding the right learning targets. The time is really the stumbling block for us as far as resources go, or as far as this whole process goes. We can have the right resource sitting there, we can have a lot of things, but the time for the teacher to be exposed to this, the time for them to sink their teeth in this, and we were talking earlier about the time is really what it takes when you figure an elementary teacher has to do all the writing, all the reading, all the math, all the science, all the social studies, all the financial literacy standards. You look at all those and think how much it takes an inordinate amount of time to look at how to get each one of those in place effectively so kids can be on top of things.
Kristy, maybe you can talk a little bit about the process of teacher preparation and professional development, and how much preparation have you had for implementing the new standards, and how prepared do you feel?
Yeah, it's overwhelming. I mean, we have to touch on so many standards. We do a standard-based report card, and just for language arts alone, there's like 28 standards we have to report on for our progress reports for parents. So it's a lot of work. But I will say that I think the Common Core, we've gotten some wonderful professional development in my school district, and I think it's led us to collaborate more effectively through that professional development that we're receiving. I think oftentimes teachers can kind of go to their classroom and work in isolation, and I think that Common Core has definitely led to a path where we can collaborate because we have to rely on each other. What are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? And so it's really upped our collaboration, I think.
I know you're saying, Luann, time is the issue, but I do want to talk about resources a little bit and curriculum, because we were talking earlier about the importance of explaining to people as reporters the difference between curriculum and standards. So let's talk about what are you using in your district? Where are people getting these resources? Are teachers going online? Have you adopted textbooks wholesale? Are you happy with them? Merlinda, maybe you can start and talk about what you guys are using, and then we'll go from there.
We currently use CMP2, Connected Math Project, and that has been a great resource. That's our number one resource that we use, and even though there's gaps that we have to fill because the Common Cores have shifted some things down, so to speak, so we have a scope and sequence that the district has. In the summer, the teachers come together and they fill all those holes, and so we have a scope and sequence that supplements materials and adds new things.
So explain. So you, as teachers, you go through this curriculum that you've been handed, and you find places where it's just
where we need to add things.
You need to add things.
So the curriculum writers did come out with additional investigations. So the district did purchase that book as well. So like expressions and equations, like I was mentioning, we use this additional investigations book to hit on those things that the CMP2 didn't have before. We are in the process of adopting a new curriculum for next year.
I think it should be pointed out that math is fairly unique in that situation, in that they rely on more of a programmatic approach to the resources that they need. In social studies, in literacy, you tend not to rely on the textbook as much as you do within math. And so resource-wise, within our district, we're using the same resource. One of the reasons why there is a reliance on the textbook at the elementary level is because most elementary teachers are not math, don't have a math degree. And so they're relying on a resource to help them through on a lot of the moves that they have to make. With some of the other subject areas within literacy, within social studies, you can rely on outside resources. But with math, there are programs that they've picked up, and you really do need to rely on those resources. Science is the same way with some of the kits that they use that are really aligned and matched to that. So it depends upon the level, K-5 or secondary, and it depends upon the subject area as well.
Luann, you and I had a nice conversation about alignment, and it's a word we end up using a lot in our reporting, but I'm not sure anybody really knows what it means, because it is something very complicated. So tell us about what alignment means to you and what the process of making sure, curriculum and standards and testing and report cards and textbooks are aligned looks like in the district.
Right. When we look at alignment, there's like we talked earlier, there are multiple things that have to work together, because we've got to make sure that the standards are I always say the standards are the base, they're the floor. That's where every child, we want them to get and be. So we look at the standards, we take from the standards and interpret them into learning. So we make a learning target which tells the child, this is what you're going to learn today. So that's an alignment piece for the child. This is what you're going to learn today, and we're going to know you're going to learn this by the success criteria you're going to have. And then we look at a lot of informal assessment. So how are we going to know if that child knows it, and what is the proficiency really going to look like? So that in itself is just how you get the alignment of a lesson together. But then those lessons accumulate into bigger pieces of learning that have to then be tested. And that's where we still use informal, and then some of the parks that we're all going to be taking next week. That is our formal assessment, and we've had to make sure that all of our learning targets, success criteria, everything that we have taught up there, they align well, so that when they get to the parks test, that they're well prepared for that test. Another entity is that report card. We all have probably gone through the standards-based report card, and now looking at them, it's like, are they really reporting out what we want parents? You can't put 28 things on a report card and expect a parent to go through and know exactly where their kid is. So a lot of times we send those report cards out early, they have a chance to look at them, they bring it in, and really look at their teacher and say, but how is my kid doing? How are they doing? So there has to be a lot of alignment of interpreting that report card out in a 15 to the half hour conference on how to align those pieces. We've got to look at those lessons too, and other pieces is curriculum. And they've talked a lot about that, is the curriculum meeting the standards? In a lot of ways, there's no perfect curriculum, there's no perfect book, there's no perfect standard. There's no one thing they can hand us and say, here, this will work. So we have to look at all of those resources that we're handed and make sure that they are meeting the standards that we need. So yes, you are correct. Are we going online? Yes, their principal goes online. We've looked at different states' curriculum alignment. We've looked at different, there are many different websites, what's reliable, what's not. My teachers have favorites that they come to me, and I always just say, does it align? Is it going to be part of the standard? Is it going to bring your children to that learning target and that success criteria at the end? So there's a lot of pieces that are integral that we got to make sure all fit together, or the standards are here and the curriculum is here, and parents are way over here somewhere looking at things. We have to make sure everything aligns and fits together so that there's a smooth progress for the kid. The kid isn't feeling pulled like, well, I thought we learned this, but now I'm being tested here, but my report card says this. And that's our job, to make sure that things are aligned together so that it's a smooth, continuous piece of learning cycle for them.
Just to be clear, if you're not sure what standards-based report cards are, Mark, do you want to give a very brief explanation? Because this might be actually some fodder for stories for people.
Well, the idea is that we want to report out on what it is the student should know and be able to do, and how can we directly align that to those targets. as she was just talking about. And so not necessarily do the report cards have to report out on these standards, because many times as you look at, especially within the literacy, when you have 28 things that become a checklist, you begin to lose the reason why you're learning those 28 things. And so we've tried to move away from that as a just general description so that I can, when I have a conversation with a student, the tendency as a parent-teacher conference is to sit down and say, okay, well, he missed this assignment. You can make this up. You can get the points for this. You can get the points for that. With standards-based grading, the idea is to set that aside and say, here's what your student knows and is able to do. Your student's understanding of historical concepts and his application of those needs some more work in this area. We want to report that information out directly as it attaches to the standards themselves. And that has been a challenge. At K-8, it's done. High school, it gets a little more complex when you get up into high school and reporting out on standards.
I do want to get to this parents issue. Start thinking of questions because I want to throw it out if you guys have stuff you want to ask. But let's get back to the parents issue, and maybe you guys can talk a little bit about, Merlinda, what have you done to communicate the changes to parents, and have they been receptive to those?
I guess, like, you know, how I was talking earlier about, like, the expectation that the kids have to go, like, super deep in their understanding with their math. I mean, just communicating to parents, like, the expectation for students and how rigorous things are, and building on that conceptual piece. So I think parents are becoming more receptive. I feel like when we first made this shift, and parents just learned so differently than how their students are learning. So I think it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight by any means, but students are becoming more receptive to it. So I feel like the kids are even communicating better than I am, I think, with their parents on what they need to know and what they need to understand.
That's a good point. Kristy, do you want to talk about the same thing?
Yeah, I just finished parent conferences prior to coming out here, and I had a lot of parents that walked in with some reservation, but after communicating with them and really giving them the information they need, I think they felt supported, and that it's a learning curve this year. It's the foundational year. We just adopted in my school district Eureka, so it's a completely different math program. It aligns with the Common Core. It was developed specifically to go with Common Core, and it's intense, and so the parents don't know how to help their kids do their homework, and so that was a big point of contention at conferences. But when you communicate with them and let them know that this is the foundational year, your kids are going to be off and running next year when they have the vocabulary and they have the processes down and they're able to do that higher level thinking, they all left pretty okay with it, saying, okay, we can do this. So I think it's just supporting one another. We're all in it together. So
yeah. And for math specifically, sometimes I get emails from parents like about a specific homework question, and they will ask me, like, what is the answer supposed to be? And I have a really hard time answering that question because they want an answer, but it's not about getting the correct answer. It's about, like Kristy was saying earlier, that productive struggle. Like, what was the thought process that your child is taking to think about this problem, and trying to guide their thinking, not just giving them the answer, but letting them struggle through it a little bit. And I feel like sometimes that's frustrating for parents, and sometimes that's frustrating for kids too, because they just want us to tell them what to do, but it's not about that. It's just about them becoming critical thinkers on their own.
And I think at K-8, there tends to be a bit of a difference with grades too. Grades in high school take on a whole new meaning. And last year, as we were implementing standards-based grading and tried it at the high school level, as well as at the same time implementing the new math standards, Common Core, we saw a drop in the student achievement within math, and parents were ready to string us up. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that grades mean a lot to parents, especially middle-income parents, when they want to get their kids into college. And if you start messing with that, you start messing with that entry, that gateway in, you're taking on quite a bit. And so even when you talk to parents, and I've had conversations with parents as the liaison in the district, and we've said, listen, we have 40% of our students who need remediation when they get to college. We are getting our kids eligible for college. Are we getting them ready for college? And for parents, it's to hear that and to understand it is one thing, but to apply it then to their child, which is to say, well, they just dropped their GPA, they might not get into Brown, or they might not get into wherever. It's really hard for them to hear that. And so at that high school level, it starts to get a little bit more convoluted and higher stakes, quite frankly, with when you tell them that there's going to be an implementation dip. there's going to be. We're asking kids to do things that are different, that are more rigorous, and because it's new, there's going to be a dip. The question is, how long is that dip lay there? And parents don't want to hear that because then they think their kids are guinea pigs, and that's a place that they just don't want to go.
Let's talk about testing just a little bit before we throw it out to you guys. Kristy, how nervous are you about the tests? Is this something teachers are talking about all the time, or is it something that you're kind of trying not to talk about?
Yeah, no, we talk about it. We have to. You know, we have to look into those little faces every day and get them prepared. So, you know, we're a week away, so it is what it is at this point. But there has been a lot of talk and anxiety around it. But I think now we're kind of to the point like, let's do this. Let's go with it. So, for me, I mean, my kids are 9 and 10 years old. It's about just not wanting them to cry when they see what they have to do. And I saw on the agenda, I think you guys got to work through a problem earlier. And so really it's just teaching them to plow through it, do what you can do the best you can. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And you were talking about the high stakes at the high school level. I had this great conversation with my kids just yesterday. And, you know, a lot of people are opting out of taking the park. We've had some walkouts in Santa Fe. And so my kids, one of them had seen it on the news and they wanted to talk about it. And we talked about how now it's just practice for them. So when it does become high stakes, they've had that opportunity to practice and used, you know, sports analogies. You know, you got to play tons of basketball to be a good player. So it's the same thing with test taking. So that's kind of our approach at the elementary level with our kids. But I think we're ready for it.
Luann, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think the other part you have to remember is this is now a computer-based test. And a lot of our school districts, we talked about this earlier, a lot of our school districts haven't even had the hardware enough for us to even be online and take a third grader through this. So, I mean, it's a scheduling nightmare if you don't have enough hardware. We went through having to add more hubs to the wireless hubs to the school last year because things would fall on and off. It's even the functionality of getting the test up and running so the kid could take the test. I had one little sweet one that described to me the ball on the balloon on the stick. She's like, what do you do with the balloon on the stick? And before we were testing, and you know, I was trying to figure out what she wanted. Well, she was trying to do that, drag down that bar. We were trying to teach him to drag the bar down. The balloon on the stick would come down, and it would scroll to the bottom. And she kept saying, I don't think I can get the balloon on the stick to go all the way down again. And so, you know, they have to know how to do that because one of the most vital graphs they may need may be right at the bottom where we're not getting to yet. So we have to that. A lot of kids in my school are 75% free and reduced. Their technology exposure is at school. It is not at home. So you have to think about your demographics and who your demographics are and the functionality of just getting that silly thing up so they can take it, let alone worrying about how they'll do on it. So there's many facets of making sure that it's just even feasible to get them on that test.
I think that's an important point you just made. We had a chance to look at some practice tests and practice items, and we saw the different functionalities and the drag and drop and all of that. And we talked about keyboarding, but we didn't talk so much about, do kids even know how to drag and drop? I mean, that's a whole other issue. Have they played, you know, I know they have the, what do they call it, the equation editors on the math tasks, which sort of look like a calculator, but you have to, you know, you can't type in the numbers. You have to scroll, you know, put your cursor over the number and click on it. So it looks different than what they may have used.
You have to use learning time to make sure they can use the computer correctly. So for the last 3 weeks, we've taken in and exposing them just to the tools on that test, so they know what tools they can use.
Yeah. So I want to throw it out to you guys. Do you have questions so far? Lillian.
Hi, Lillian with the Heitin report. Thank you all for being here. It's really great to have a panel of educators that on there. Yeah, I guess my main question for you is sort of twofold. One, what questions do you wish reporters were asking you? And then sort of right tied into that is what misunderstandings are you finding amongst your fellow teachers, amongst parents that we might be able to help explain?
The conflation of testing and the standards is just killing us. It continues to be a problem. Common Core and Park in the same breath, and I think those are two separate issues that just have to be dealt with Individually, they have their own issues right now. I think in general, when you talk to at least my colleagues and you look at Common Core, they support Common Core. They like, and for me personally, it's why I got into teaching. It wasn't that I wanted kids to know a bunch of stuff that they would then forget. I want them to learn some stuff. How do you access it? What do you do with it? What questions do you have about it? That's what I want them to really go after. And so I think Common Core is asking them to do that. Park is a whole different issue, especially within this state, as to how much testing we're doing and so on. So if we can break that bridge between the two, I think that would be very helpful. And I think maybe politicians could start reading up on those articles too, because it's constantly something. That's right. You call one and you call it the other. So I think those are two of the issues. I think the other thing is it's important to see that the best relationships that we've had with our community in explaining Common Core is when the teacher of their students is up in front of them telling them what it looks like. Here's what your student is doing. There's a direct connection because you are working with my student versus someone from the district talking about Common Core, that direct connection. So when you're asking teachers, what does it look like? Give me an example of what that looks like. Give me an example of that moment where you went, oh, they're getting it. I think those anecdotes help parents to see what's taking place within the classrooms in Common Core.
I think the most important thing for me is you all to do kind of a root cause analysis. There are some things that I do control in the universe and some things I don't. Very few things do I really control. I control the well-being of kids, the safety of kids, what we can present to them as the most important aspects of what the standards are asking them. We don't control much other than that, believe it or not. Those are the things that every day we can control. So like you said, there's not a lot we can control with the parks and how the textbooks are written, how the curriculum is written. Those don't fall in our laps. Those are things that we have to look at, we have to make critical decisions. I think one of the really most important things is how many critical decisions in this standards-based learning do teachers now have to take on? I think that's something definitely you have to realize, because yeah, when you get to 50, you're kind of beginning to say you're 50-ish. When you get to 30 years of education, you begin to say you're 30-ish. So I didn't have to make all the critical decisions when I started 30 years ago that these lovely people have to make. A lot of things are pretty defined, laid out. You taught addition, you taught subtraction. There are some immensely complicated critical decisions that have to go into what goes on in those classrooms as far as learning happens. And I think that's the part of this. You have to realize what we can control and what we can't always control.
More questions?
Hi, Erin Richards, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. As the standards have been implemented, I've been really curious about what states or districts or individual schools are doing in terms of training of their teachers. So 3 of you are from Colorado districts. 1 of you is from a New Mexico district. Did you feel adequately trained over the past several years to not only shift your teaching but also prepare for the tests? Have there been holes? I'm sure some of this depends on what school or what district you're in, but in Wisconsin, I feel like it really depends. The state has done some training, but it's been really variable by district. I'm wondering what your experiences have been.
I think Colorado's a bit of a muddy swamp. I think it sounds like maybe like Wisconsin. We talked earlier, maybe like New Mexico, where the Colorado Department of Education have gotten standards. They've tried to create things. There's some really pretty good templates of lessons they've had, and they've had teachers actually develop those, to be honest. They've had teachers develop them. So there's some resources there, but I think it's been to their actual district then to come down and decipher how they want to do that. And then in some regards, then it falls right down into the principals and the teachers' lap. So how are we going to do that? I just decided headlong we had to spend the time, we had to spend the professional development time. So for the last 2 years, that is what we have done. We have talked about very little other than what are the standards, using the time we have to work on that alignment piece of the standards. So that was a professional decision made by myself and my teachers, that was where our professional development time was going to be spent. And I think other schools in my district have spent professional development time other places, having teachers collaborate on the side, working with their teacher leaders. So I think it comes down to really almost at the school level to what intensity and how they're going to do it is how I think Colorado's, well, my district has done it. Yours might be different.
As a math teacher, DPS has, well, I guess for language arts as well, DPS has given us 5 days. I mean, it's kind of hard because it takes us out of the classroom, but it's very, very important. So I just had a math meeting actually just this past Tuesday, and it gives, so we have 5 of those a year, and it gives us the opportunity to get with other teachers who are working at different schools as well. And then we have our instructional leaders as well who, so we could go through units and we unit plan together and we look at the scope and sequence and we make sure that teachers are using the same resources and the correct resources and making sure that we're hitting on those standards so that we're not just pulling from different places, but we're all kind of on the same page with things.
And I think too, the training's really never done. This is you can't do a workshop on this. It is something that I can know the standards. I can tell you the English language arts standards for history and social studies for 11, 12, but do I understand them? And the only way that you understand them is by getting out there and doing it. And that's the implementation is the learning piece, and that's the struggle right now, is that takes time. That's a different time cycle than politicians are on. Their election cycle is much shorter than the cycle we're on. And so part of the problem is that, you know, they need to pick up a bit of a vision as to what this is going to look like, but it takes time. It's going to take 5, 6, 7 years before we feel comfortable enough with them, but we will continually interrogate them, take them apart, make sure that we're hitting them. So this isn't it's one of those ideas that we used to have with how we viewed education before, fitting that industrial model of I just need to go out there and give you the certain knowledge you need to have to go out there and implement it. It is vastly different now. The level of understanding that you have to have with those standards, being able to use them is much more different. And so we show this cartoon in our district where there's a Bedouin who's on a camel and he's turned around talking to his family on camels behind him and he's saying, stop asking me when we're going to get there. We're Bedouins, for crying out loud. The idea being is we're never going to get there, and that's what parents keep on saying. When are they going to be done? Why didn't you beta test these? You just can't do that. That's just not something you can do.
I hear that a lot. Well, these standards have never been vetted. They weren't beta tested. Well, has anyone ever beta tested standards anywhere? I've never heard of it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's ever happened in any state. So.
You can't do it.
Okay. I know we have more questions. I saw a few hands. Oh, we got one here first.
Oh, just a real quick one. So you guys we're talking a little bit about the standards-based report cards. Are there any good resources you could point us to about those, or any good examples you could provide of what they look like and how they work?
The people who, Ken O'Connor is an author who's done a lot of work with that. Stiggins, Tom Gusky from Kentucky. If you pick up some of their work, you can see examples of what those standards-based reporting cards look like. Those would probably be the best resources.
Great. Question over here.
So it's building on one of the last comments, but can you talk a little bit about the way in which the standards, the new assessments, accountability for individual teachers, for schools, for like all these things are pulling together right now, and why and how that just kind of has an impact on teachers, on how people are feeling, on uncertainty. I'm just wondering if you can do that and sort of pull it together for us a little bit.
So Colorado, you have, because of Senate Bill 191, right, we have the teacher evaluation. You have a pretty stringent teacher evaluation process, so this is a good question for you people in Colorado.
I don't know how to answer that question. So
Yeah.
The part of the connection, sure. So our teacher evaluation, each of the districts has been, you can come up with your own educator effectiveness approach that you want to take within the state of Colorado. We have chosen within our districts to take that 50%, which is supposed to rely on student data, and we've put a lot of, we've attached it to some of those standardized tests, PARC in particular. And so we have wrapped that into our teacher evaluation process. We've spent the last couple of years doing that. If they throw PARC out, you just throw out 2 years of our teacher evaluation process that we worked on, and we're starting over from scratch again. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to align what it is that those students need to be able to do with those standards, with PARC, and so that there's a direct connection to them, and also try to make a connection to professional development. Because that's one thing that we really want to get teachers to understand, is that this just isn't about evaluation, about trying to decide where you are, but also what you need. And we've got to make sure that those are aligned, that our evaluation system is aligned to those assessments that we're using, which is PARC, but also the standards themselves, because there are within the districts their own set of testing regimes that match to those standards. And so we want to make sure that there's a clear alignment between what we're expecting teachers to do and how we're monitoring that so that we can then evaluate it. And I don't know if that answers your question or not.
And the testing doesn't, it happens in typically 3rd grade through about 11th grade. I think they're jumping to 12th grade right now, maybe. But there's a group of children, kindergarten through 2nd grade, who their teachers are on the same rubric. So one of the things we're looking at is SLOs, or student learning objectives, and we're going to have each of the teachers create student. Part of the other 50% for us is not only test scores, but it is on kind of tying together what my students need, what my professional development is, how have I worked to move this group of students to a certain place that I want them to be in. And so I don't want a false illusion that it's just the test scores will determine the teacher and how that teacher's doing. There's a lot more to that, part of that evaluation. An evaluation is 27 pages, and it has got check boxes galore across it. And so that's what I was doing before I got here, was going through a teacher's rubric, checking the boxes, making comments, getting comments back from them, they give me evidence. So that's a part of it, is that. And then the other part are test scores and their own data that they're trying to keep track of and create. And they know that group of kids, so they're the best ones to say, here's the hole, here's what I need to do to fill that hole, here might be the professional development I need from you, principal or district, that needs to help me get those kids there. So I think that's another important aspect. I think you're right, that is a complicated circle. That's why we all went like, oh, that is a very complicated circle that you got in. And so I think that the most important thing in my day is to make sure I keep my teachers focused on their children and their learning. There are a lot of evaluations. Kindergarten has their own new assessment and goal. There's the READ Act plans. There's so many Senate bills and things. We've got to think through this process of how to keep teachers focused on the learning with their children. That I think is one of the most critical pieces, because it is. There's a lot out in the media. There's a lot everywhere that draws people into certain pockets. And you were bringing them up earlier as we were sitting back talking about this and parent and that, and how they do this. But really the most important thing that you all could do is help keep it focused on the children and what the children need and how the children are supported and how these, I'd say, for most teachers, they're not in this for money, that's for sure. And their time is every 24/7 that they're working with these kids and thinking about these kids. So it's keeping that alignment of what I can disseminate, simplify, and figure out how to make that work within the learning process of the child. I think that's the most important thing, is how do we keep these all as productive learning process, whether it's a Senate bill and another assessment or another thing. We've got to keep that still focused back on the child and what they need to know.
And I just think that's so interesting. In our offices, sometimes this becomes a political discussion so quickly. Everything in Common Core becomes political, and we hear it all the time. But when I'll walk into a school, I don't think that's how teachers are talking about it in the teachers' lounge or in their classrooms, or they're talking about it quite differently. They're talking about it, how am I going to teach these kids? It's a different conversation. I mean, are you hearing any political discussion in your schools among teachers? Is there talk of federal overreach, or is there? I mean, Marcus, are you shaking your head?
Well, it tends to. I guess it's because in social studies, we always like to pontificate on whatever's out there, but there is some conversation with that. Although it's, within teachers themselves, I haven't seen a lot of pushback. There are the Facebook pages that pop up and pushing back on it, and we have some conversations, but I don't think it really gets to that 30,000-foot level a lot. But it's something that they're aware of, and we'll engage in that conversation. But I think it's fairly unique to perhaps different departments.
I think they're fully aware that what they do what we do in a school sways with the political nature of what's going on, who's elected, who's in power, what's going to happen. We know, after certainly as long as I've been in, that it sways back and forth with political tenor in it, but that's not what they're a part of, and that's not what they're doing. And so I would say that is not what they think of first. They're concerned about their children being over-tested. They're concerned that politicians really don't understand the complexity of a kid that's maybe in a Title I school, that we're making sure the breakfast gets eaten, we're making sure that the safety of the neighborhood they're living in, that they get to school and they get home in a safe manner. We're making sure that that the hierarchy of needs are being met, because if they don't have food, if they don't have safety, if they don't have security, learning will never happen for them. And so we're concerned about that end, and the politicians, I don't think, always get a good scope of what goes into a kid that might have less for breakfast or more, more of an argument at the family and they didn't sleep all night or things like that. So I think that's what, at a teacher's day, that's what they're worried about.
More questions? Do we have someone back there? Nate?
Yeah, this is kind of building up.
Tell us where you're from.
Nate Ropes in Oklahoma Watch, and this is kind of building off of what you talked about a couple minutes ago. And kind of expanding it to higher education, though, are new teachers coming out of college, do they feel like they're ready to meet these new standards, or are they feeling overwhelmed? Or what can be done to maybe help them hit the ground better? What should colleges be looking at?
The new ones I've been hiring are probably a little more astute to standards. I don't know, in the hiring process I've seen in the last couple of years, they have a little more understanding around standards. I'm thinking of one of my teams of teachers who, two of them are 15 plus years, and they're kind of getting on and trying to figure out the standards. And the newbie of the group, year one comes in, and the first thing she asked me is this: where are your standards, and how can I get a hold of them, and where's the curriculum, and how? So she was very aware of how those two worked very well together, and she's been, I think, a bit of a leader in the fact with her team. This seems normal to her. This is a normalcy that the ones that are 15 years, they've gone through many other curriculum decisions. And so I think from my experience, the new ones coming in have a little bit more of an understanding in their teacher course that these are the standards and this is how you're going to teach, and the teaching process looks different right now.
Kristy, you've been teaching for a while, and how does this differ from when you came out of ed school?
Well, yeah, the shift is completely different. I think for me personally, I went and got my national boards, and that's exactly the same expectation for teachers. You're meeting a standard across the nation. So by doing that own work for myself, it really makes it easy to implement it in the classroom. I'm not asking my kids to do anything I wasn't willing to do.
The Common Core, you mean? Or
I just mean the standards, meeting a national standard. And that's basically what we're asking kids to do, is to meet a standard, And so.
Any more questions out there? Grace has one over here.
Sorry if this seems redundant with anything else you said, but at the end of the day, as teachers, do you value these tests? Do you think that you'll find the results of these tests when these PARCC tests that are about to happen, do you think you'll find them useful as teachers?
Good question.
I just had this conversation with a parent at parent conference, and we do short cycle assessments, district assessments that we give our kids 3 times a year. Those are very helpful in instructing what I'm going to teach kids. What are they learning? Where are their deficits? What do I need to do to step up and meet those deficits? National standardized testing, we often don't even get the results until our kids have moved on to the next grade level. So as a teacher in the classroom, it doesn't provide me with as much information as like my short cycle assessments do.
Anyone else?
Well, I think it's, I have some sympathy for PARCC and the department as they're implementing it, because we're asking these assessments to serve so many masters. We're asking them to audit performance. We're asking them to give feedback back to teachers. And to do that, you have to do certain things. Number one, if you want it to be valid, it's going to be a longer test. You need 5 or 6 questions per item in order for it to be valid. If you want it back quickly, you need to put it on do an internet computer-based program. They're doing some of those things we're asking them to do, but while we're doing it, it turns into this kind of convoluted mess. We get information back, and they tend to be PARCC and TCAP that we used to use here in Colorado. We refer to them as autopsies, because you get the results after the patient's moved on or died. The student has moved on. I can't do anything about it. We need to have we need to have more transparency with the exam, so that as a teacher, I know the questions that are being asked and how they're being asked. problem with that is it's incredibly expensive to write exams. And so if we want that transparency, it's going to cost money. So you just get all these layers that build on top of it when you are asking these assessments to do so many things that it becomes difficult to serve all those different masters. For us, we use it for curriculum development. We look at our curriculum across the board to see if our students are hitting those areas they need to. As to go back in and use it as a formative, as a checkup for the student, you can't because the student's already moved out. So we don't put as much, we don't focus on PARC. PARC will take care of itself. We focus on those interims that we have, those formative ones that are much more effective, and research tells us are much more effective with student achievement. PARC is what it is.
It's really interesting to hear you say that those district tests are the most useful, because we're hearing a lot of talk at the federal level, and a lot of state school chief school officers are saying we want to reduce testing, and to them, you know, the low-hanging fruit is the district test. We'll get rid of those because those aren't helping us compare states and compare schools and all that. But then to have you sit here and say, no, those are what inform my instruction, that's actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
So.
And that's because it's two different things. I want it back for feedback.
Right.
They want it to audit performance. And so there's a lot of pushback on that to say we want this so we can compare and see where those schools are struggling, where the achievement gap is. So there is that tension that exists within there. Districts do, quite frankly, districts do have a lot of interims, and they could cut back a little bit. I know in our district we could. But we're faced with what the federal has asked us to do. That's what we're stuck with. How do we work around that? And start to use some of those things. So it's a lot of testing. We can cut back certainly on it. I think there are some other, Mark Tucker has a great piece out now about accountability, when we should be testing and so on. He's breaking it into not every year, but census exams in 4th grade, and then just do some targets in some of the other grades, census again in 8th grade. Makes more sense, but it's just a different accountability piece that we need to look at some point.
Eric.
I guess for the record, Eric Roblin, EWA. To build on that question, about the sort of the question of overtesting, and we were talking earlier, we had an assessment expert who said, everyone gets nervous about how these tests are used, and we want to have a really good assessment takes time, and they take longer. So there's this natural tension between spending more time on testing versus spending less time and maybe presumably getting a less sophisticated analysis out of that, or results. Can you all speak about that tension? And also, if you were to, do you feel like there's too much, and what testing would you ditch if you had to, or if it was your choice?
I think they've said it so beautifully in the fact that if we're looking at testing for learning, those are formative assessments that we do on an ongoing basis. That's how we'll base our teaching. I will tell you our testing schedule. We started. I'm lucky. I get a little more leeway in my district around what testing I can do right now, just because of our performance space where we came out. So I get a little bit more leeway. Sometimes the district is asking schools to do these acuity, which is a testing that goes 3 times a year. We start with our second language learners in January, and they have to take a test access, and that judges their writing, speaking, spelling. That's just for second language learners. And so if you're a second language learner, you just took that test. Monday you may be taking your next test, and that's a week of testing every morning. And then you will then again take, if you're a 4th grader, you're going to take a social studies test at the beginning of April. If you're a 5th grader, you're going to take a science test. And then at the end of that cycle, then you're retaking all the PARCS tests again, because those are the end of the year testing measures. So it is a little crazy for any kid that gets caught up in the 5 different cycles of testing that happen between January and May.
How many hours do you think the average kid spends on standardized tests?
That's such a loaded question. Well, and we've pushed back a lot. I mean, you can look at Teach Plus did a study where they just went in and they looked at the time that's scheduled for the test, and they came up, I think it was 1.7% within some metro districts. Others, our own CEA, Colorado Education Association, came out and said it was much higher than that. So, I mean, you're going to get a variance within that. You've got to establish what you mean by how much time you're spending on testing. There are times where you need to spend time with the students so they understand the manipulatives in the test so that they become comfortable with that. Is that teaching to the test? I don't know. Is that a good skill for them to have because they're going to be interacting with technology? Maybe. You know, so it becomes very difficult as to try to really nail down a number within that. I don't have problems with testing. There are assessments. I think some of the problem is just what do you do with the information. If we can get a regime set up where you assess, you evaluate, and then you go back in and you use that to make changes, to remediate, that's fine. But with so many of the tests, they're really not used that way. So for me, it's the end results of those tests versus the sheer number of those tests.
Got a question over here.
I know Park is designing.
Sorry, can you tell us
Sorry,
again?
Emmanuel Felton, Heckinger Report. Park is designing formative assessments. Like, is there room for district formative assessments to get much better? Like, what are they like now? Like, how useful is the information that you're getting from those things?
And I know I'm kind of monopolizing this with assessment, but a lot of the work I've done with that is I wish we could change that we call it formative assessment. It should be formative-assessment. It's a process. And the idea behind formative is to assess and then to evaluate what the students know and then to remediate. Formative assessment should be those that come out of the schools, should come out of the classrooms. If we start coming up with those as formative assessments, we're moving away from where we need to be with that information coming back. So I would encourage districts, if they're looking at those formative assessments, to push back and say, no, this is something our teachers need to do so we know how to assess, but it's that information we get back from those assessments that we use to remediate with those students. Formative assessment is a process. It's not an exam, it's not an event. And that's where the research tells us that we can have a huge impact if we use that feedback, timely, specific, accurate, and fair, we'll have a huge impact. But if we're all of a sudden just coming up with a regime of tests, they don't have any meaning. And then we start to lose out on the power that the formative assessments can have.
Just to be clear, formative assessment, it's kind of jargony, but what it means is a test that informs your instruction, that you take the results and you change what you're teaching kids based on that. So teachers will say formative assessment is everything from, well, Park is designing formative assessment that kids will take on a computer, sort of look like the end of your test, I think. But formative assessment can also just be a teacher standing in front of the class and saying, you know, 1 finger to 5 fingers, tell me how you feel about your understanding of what we just learned. Do you give yourself a 1 or a 5? I mean, that's helping a teacher gauge their instruction and change what they're going to do accordingly. So
Yeah, I was going to speak to that. It looks, testing looks very different in the classroom than when we were in the classroom as elementary kids. My assessment is a checklist. Are they showing the skill to proficiency? Are they showing that they can do it time and time again? If not, how do I intervene? What kind of intervention do I do? How do I differentiate the lesson to provide what my student needs in order to be able to access their goal? And so it's not just we're going to take this test every Friday to see if you learned what I taught you all week. It looks very different in the classroom now.
No, there may not be a spelling test per se. You may have some spelling words, but the teacher may go back in with the child and look and say, we had agreed that these 5 words were words you knew and could spell. I don't see them spelled correctly in your writing. That's a formative assessment. Here's what I expected you to learn. Here's what you've been producing this week. I don't see it there. So that is really what at the heart of what teachers do every day is to figure out what do you know, what do you don't know, what do you know, what do you don't know, and base their lessons and base their strategies on what can I do to move these children closer to what that standard says they need to know.
any more questions? I've heard that formative assessment has changed with the Common Core because the standards are more complicated. So you have to do, I've heard people say, like, to really understand if a student knows this standard, I have to pull them out one-on-one and do that kind of formative assessment. Do you think it's changed? Do you think teachers have to do it differently now?
No, I don't think they have to do it differently. They just have to know what they're looking for. And I think you had talked about that earlier. They have to unpack these standards to really know and understand what they're actually being asked to do. So once the teacher really knows what they're being asked to do, then it's easier to go in and look and find evidence in their work, in their conversations that they do know and understand what they're doing. I think the difference is the tests that need to be given right now need to look a little more complex, need to look a little more have a little more thinking process through them. And so I think that's the new thing for the teacher is how do I design my activities and look at what we're doing as part of this learning process that I know what I'm looking for. When they're doing a science project, what is the learning target here? What am I looking for? Am I looking for that they understand when I spin a top that it depends where the weight is, how long it's going to go? Is that can they understand that or can they not understand that? And I watched a teacher do that yesterday. She went around the room and said, I think only about half of them got it from what I see written down in their papers and what I watched. I think we're going to have to go back to looking at that look for again and know what that standard says and how these kids are going to understand it better tomorrow.
And higher order thinking needs to be assessed differently. Higher order thinking cannot be assessed with, it's difficult to do with the multiple choice test. And so there is some truth to that. That when you're, it's funny, we have our math team coming up with these advanced questions, and they don't want to release the question because if you release the question and a student sees it, it now is not an advanced question anymore because it's not new and unique. And so writing these questions becomes very difficult to do. But it's when you get to that higher level, having a conversation or doing portfolios or having other forms of assessment become key and important. You're moving up that depth of understanding chart, the depth of knowledge chart. That means a different assessment.
The application and synthesis you were talking about before, Luann.
Difficult to do in multiple choice.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any more questions for our panel of educators? If not, I think we will wrap up here. Thank you all so much. This was a great panel. I appreciate having you.